Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And in our ongoing series on Nobel Prize winners, tonight we're going to discuss Paul Boyer, who died recently at the age of 99. He died only a couple of weeks short of his 100th birthday. Dr. Boyer was awarded 1/4 of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1997, along with Jens Skou, who was awarded half the prize, and John Walker, who was awarded the other quarter of the prize. His work was for elucidation of the enzymatic mechanism underlying the synthesis of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. As the Nobel website describes it, all life requires energy. In both plants and animals, energy is stored and transported by a special molecule, adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Photosynthesis and respiration generate a flow of hydrogen ions, which are used to build up ATP molecules with the help of ATP synthase, an enzyme that facilitates the process without being incorporated in the final product. In 1974, Paul Boyer presented a theory explaining how ATP synthase works. The theory was substantiated in 1994 when John Walker used X-ray crystallography to determine the structure of ATP synthase. I might add that Jens Skou, who was awarded half the prize that year for his discovery of the sodium-potassium pump in the cell, which is critical in nerve transmission through the help of ATP synthase, died just 2 weeks ago, and we're going to pair his podcast with that of Dr. Boyer. Start out with a little biographical information on Dr. Boyer. He was born in Provo, Utah, and he earned his undergraduate degree at Brigham Young University, which was just a few blocks from his childhood home. He studied chemistry and math, and the year he graduated, he met the girl who would become his wife, and they were married for 78 years, which is around the longest of anybody I can remember on these podcasts. He completed his PhD in biochemistry at the University of Wisconsin in Madison in 1943, and he soon went to work on a project sponsored by the Wartime Committee on Medical Research at Stanford. The group was tasked with finding a way to stabilize blood plasma proteins so that soldiers could receive life-saving transfusions in the field. The team succeeded, and the techniques they devised are still in use today. In 1946, he accepted an appointment in the biochemistry department at the University of Minnesota. There was a push in the late 1950s and early 1960s as the population grew on the West Coast for the West Coast universities to recruit academic talent from the rest of the country, including the Midwest. And in 1963, he moved to UCLA, and it was at UCLA that he did the work for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize. His work was for describing the structure and function of ATP synthase, the enzyme which helps generate ATP, the source of energy for the cell. Humans produce and use an enormous quantity of ATP every day. Boyer once said that the amount of ATP created and consumed by a typical graduate student on a typical day is equal to the weight of the student's body. ATP was first discovered by the German chemist Carl Lohmann in 1929. By 1960, scientists had determined that the molecule was synthesized inside cells by the enzyme ATP synthase. Here's a little bit on ATP synthase.
Life requires energy. The universal biological fuel is a molecule called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. ATP stores chemical energy in the form of a high-energy phosphate bond. As the name suggests, it consists of an adenosine ring with a chain of 3 phosphate groups attached. The last of these phosphates can be split off to release the energy within the bond, resulting in adenosine diphosphate and free inorganic phosphate. This energy is needed to keep cells alive and is used from processes from muscle contraction to producing the thoughts your brain is having right now. The hydrolysis of ATP can be reversed by the addition of inorganic phosphate to ADP. However, this of course requires energy and is performed by a molecular power generator called ATP synthase. This molecular motor is found in the mitochondria of eukaryotic cells and is responsible for making most of the ATP. Mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cells, turn over around 60 kilograms of ATP every day in an adult person. A long chain of biochemical processes convert the energy stored in food into a proton gradient across the inner mitochondrial membrane. These protons drive a rotation of the turbine within ATP synthase, resulting in the synthesis of ATP.
Even though scientists knew that ATP synthase was critical for the generation of ATP, they didn't know how it did that. Boyer theorized that the ATP synthase worked in a sort of a rotating motor structure, and I won't bore you with the details of that and the enzyme binding sites, Suffice it to say that when John Walker did the X-ray crystallography, he verified Boyer's theory on how ATP synthase works to generate ATP. Here's a simplified description of what Boyer called the binding change mechanism, whereby ATP synthase uses energy to pry itself free of the ATP molecules it forms so that they can then be used elsewhere in the cell.
It's been called one of the wonders of the molecular world, an amazing nanoscale machine. ATP synthase is a high-tech micromolecular power generator inside the cells of your body. It generates adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, an energy molecule that provides fuel that every one of your cells needs to function. Without this fuel, your cells will cease operation, and so will you. ATP synthase works like a rotary engine. The barrel-shaped rotator is composed of 10 to 15 protein parts called subunits. The rotator spins around, transmitting mechanical energy into the drive shaft of the machine, which helps make ATP. This drive shaft has a specially placed bump that opens and closes parts as the drive shaft spins around. This bump opens special protein subunits on the bottom of the machine. When the bottom subunits open, a spent energy molecule called adenosine diphosphate, or ADP, enters the machine. The mechanical motion causes the ADP to bind with an additional phosphate group, creating the ATP energy molecule. And the ATP drifts off into the cell, ready to power some biomechanical reaction. The ATP synthase machine has many parts we recognize from human-designed technology. A rotor, a stator, a drive shaft, and other basic components of a rotary engine. The ATP synthase is one of thousands of elegantly designed molecular machines inside your cells that make your life and all known life possible.
Dr. Boyer also worked with other enzymes. Just want to remind you what enzymes are. They are proteins that facilitate reactions without becoming involved in them. So in the case of ATP synthase, it helps generate ATPs without becoming involved in the reaction itself. And Dr. Boyer did elegant work with other enzymes, although none of his work was as prolific as his work with ATP synthase. In an interview at the meeting of Nobel laureates in Lindau, Germany in 2000, Dr. Boyer talked about his views on the Nobel Prize and the value it contributes to society.
I would like to comment on two things. One, the Nobel Prizes. The responsibility of the Nobel committees, as I'm sure you're aware, they're writing the history of science.
Yes.
They choose just ones of the problems, but the ones they choose become then much better known in nature. So I think this is one of the prominent functions of the Nobel. But the other one relates to the public understanding of science. I think the fact that there is a Nobel Prize, that it gets in the newspaper, that it's done a good job up until my selection, of good selections, you see, so that it has been well received on it. This has helped the interaction of science and society because I feel that the privilege of being a scientist at the present time in our society is a remarkably fine thing, both for the scientist and humanity. I think within a grouping of a university, a setting where you can get a grouping of students and postdoctoral fellows that are sitting around a table here with 10 or 12 of you, trying to understand the experiments you've just completed, trying to devise the experiments you want to do next, discussing them in an atmosphere where it's bringing the best thoughts of these people. Out of this then comes the milieu and the things that make it possible for me to think of a new approach at a different time, you see. I think that grouping of scholars in a university, supported now by society to give us building, to give us monies, to buy instruments, is the finest thing that's been developed to try to understand nature, to try to get the answers of science. And then, so I appreciate that. I think that this is something that we need to tell humanity we appreciate. Now, the other part of that is that what is produced out of basic research has done so much to change the world. Now, either you want to understand how the world operates and let it change and let it enrich the lives of the other people. To me, when I can listen to a fine piece of creative music, that's an enrichment that somebody else gave me. But I think for the general public, when they can learn about how the oxygen that they breathe, what it does, or how the last aspect of astronomy, I think they appreciate it. I think there's a beauty to it. So I think we return
That's
to
an
the
enrichment
public.
of human
Right.
life also.
And that's an enrichment. And the best way to get that enrichment is to have the people in the places most capable of it doing the research. So the Nobel helps do that, you see.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Taps. What should we close with to honor Paul Boyer? Well, as I said before, he's from Utah, from Provo. Not many great musicians from Utah, but there is one notable one, and that's Donny Osmond. Now, normally I'm not a big fan of Donny Osmond's music, but for a couple years, he lived in my neighborhood here in Chicago when he was doing Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. His kids went to the same school as my kids did, and he was actually a very nice guy. So we'll close with a song he did that's actually a cover version of a song made famous by the man who discovered him, and that, of course, was Andy Williams. So to pay tribute to Paul Boyer from his fellow citizen from the Beehive State, here's Donny Osmond singing Henry Mancini's Moon River.
Moon River, wider than a mile, I'm crossing you in style someday. You dream maker, you heartbreaker, wherever you're going, I'm going your way.
I want to give an appreciation to what's been possible for my life, to make it so that I could do what I'm interested in and to have it work out and be appreciated. It's a wonderful thing.